Hi everyone and welcome back to Story of the World Highlights. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 31. Chapter 31 takes us into the heart of the Industrial Revolution and looking at a lot of the impacts of that invention we read about, the steam engine. So let's take a look. So here we have the kind of shift in lifestyle was happening. As we talked about before, the steam engine was perfected by James Watt and other big inventions of the time. We saw that people were consistently making the things they needed inside the home. If dad was a craftsman, because there were craftsmen at the time, if dad was a craftsman and maybe he specialized in making wool sweaters from sheep wool, the family would work together, including the kids, to run the sheep farm, to shear the sheep, to make the wool, to make the sweaters. From beginning to end, it was an all-in-one, do-it-yourself kind of process. However, with the invention of the steam engine, remember, the steam engine could work faster and longer than a human could work. And so they could produce that same wool sweater a lot faster than if one person was to make it at home. And so with that, we saw factories starting to get lots of the machines needed to make these different things, whether it be a garment, like a piece of clothing, or tools or anything. And so we saw that the factories were starting to get made. And in these factories, it was a little bit different. Instead of an all-in-one style, we had a step one, you bunch do that. Step two, a different group of people do that. And so things were getting more specialized to each step was done by somebody else. So if you were in step one, that's all you would do all day. Just same old thing all day long. You might imagine it's a little bit boring, but that was the lifestyle of working in a factory. So they manned the machines that were powered by steam engines, and that was the new lifestyle. So we saw a big shift in how things were made and how people were living. Now, with the fact that a lot of people could be making things at once and for longer hours because the steam engine could help keep the machines running alongside the humans who operated them, we saw people deciding, landowners, to buy more and more factories because this was the way to make money. They could buy a single factory, fill it with machines, and then pay people the same amount of money they would have been making here, which wasn't a lot. They weren't rich people making these things at home. So they could pay them that little bit of money that they would have made, and then they would cash in on the profits because they're making so many of these at once. So this was a really big money earner. And as you can tell from history, if there's a way to make more money, the people who can will. And that's what was happening. Now, with everybody doing specialized jobs, they wasn't the same motivation. Here, somebody can say, I have 2 orders for wool sweaters. I'm going to work hard to produce those wool sweaters so I can earn the money and feed my family. I earn the money once I complete the job. That was the thing that was motivating for a lot of workers. But now when they're doing that same boring job all day, you're just going to be, I don't want to keep doing this. I want to go home. I want to play outside. This is boring, right? Because they're getting paid per hour now, not per product they make. And so with that, they had to hire people to watch over the workers and making sure they're staying focused. Hey, stay focused. Hey, keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. Hey, don't slow down. I know you're getting bored, but don't slow down. You would think that that was an easy job to do and not too ridiculous, stay focused. We do that at school, stay focused. But these overseers took it a little far. They would say things like, hey, no looking out the window. Hey, no bathroom breaks for you. Hey, you took 16 minutes to eat dinner. You were only given 15 minutes. Hey, you made a face at the other person. You can't do that. And it was just not nice. If someone was yelling at you all day at school saying, hey, no looking out the window, no bathroom breaks, I don't care that your pencil's almost broken, you wouldn't want to work. You wouldn't do a good job. So we were constantly running into people being tired and not wanting to work and this being horrible, but then getting yelled at for not working fast enough. So it was really hard. And if they got punished, that money that they would be making would turn into almost nothing because they would take it out of their salary, their paycheck. And they also realized, these factory owners, that they could pay women and children less to do the same job as a man. So these harsh conditions and treatments even were happening to little kids. Imagine you having to stand at one little machine all day long, from breakfast to dinner, with no breaks, no talking to your friends, no looking out the window, no bathroom breaks. That's horrible. And some of these factories didn't have really good health conditions. The dust from some of the materials being made would be in the air, and little kids whose lungs are very sensitive would breathe that in and often die. So it was not pleasant living in a factory, or working in a factory, I should say. The government did try to step in and help a little bit, but factory workers were like, I don't care, government, no, 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 no. So the government could only really get away with passing small laws. And some of the small little laws that they passed, one was called the Factory Act, and the Factory Act made it that only 8 years old and older could work in a factory. And kids can only work for 12 hours. That's still breakfast to dinner. But before this law, some factories made them work until midnight. Isn't that ridiculous? They're kids. Anyways, some of these laws helped a little bit, but not well enough. The conditions were still horrible. Factory owners were still making tons of money, and they didn't care who it cost to make that money. Now, people were starting to get really upset and protest about this, as you can imagine. And especially those craftsmen, those people who used to make those things in their homes, they prided themselves in their work. My father has been a wool sweater maker for forever, and his father was a sweater maker, and his father was a sweater maker, and I am a sweater maker. You could imagine that their way of life has changed so much. Their identity has changed. If I'm not a sweater maker, what am I? That's all I've ever wanted to do. That's all I've ever known. So they were also upset. Plus, they couldn't keep making sweaters. You think, oh, they can just make them at home. It's okay. They don't have to go to factories. But no, they did have to go to factories, because factories were making so many things, they could sell them for cheaper. And that meant that people who were not making a lot of money, they could only really afford the cheap thing. So they didn't have money to spend on handcrafted goods. So those craftsmen ended up not being able to sell very much and not being able to feed themselves. So they were forced to go work in those factories. Now, a lot of these craftsmen and people who worked in the factories, the conditions were just so horrible. So finally, there was protests where people started to break the machines they were forced to work at. And one of the leaders and icons of the time was a man named Ned Ludd. And legend says, or the stories say, that he was fed up. He was done with making all of these things out of loom, something to make cloth with, that he broke the machine in a crazy fit and destroyed everything. And he led the protests and the revolution and revolt of these people who were done with the system and the way it was working. And those people were called Luddites, after his name, Ned Ludd. Now, the government finally said enough is enough. You're breaking too many machines. You're destroying too many factories. We're losing money as a country. Because again, England likes their money. So they started sending soldiers in to protect factories and making it against the law to break a machine. And this even happened in America. We saw the spread of factories come to America as well. It came later than it did in Great Britain, but it still came nonetheless. And we even saw, especially in America, the beginning of company towns. A company town is where the company owns the buildings around the factory. So company owners would build homes around the factory for their employees to work at so that they could work longer hours, because the commute going from work to home was so short. Now, some of these companies did not spend a lot of money on these houses. They just were shacks. They were not good. They were not great conditions. And because these factories were just quickly making some houses very cheaply, throwing them together, a lot of people had to share, many families living in one house even. And the cities were not able to keep up with how fast these company towns were coming up. And so they weren't able to create proper roads or plumbing or anything. And so we saw the conditions there being horrible. Garbage, poop, everything on the ground in the streets. It was gross. People were getting sick. These became known as slums because they were bad conditions to live in. So these are some of the impacts of the Industrial Revolution and our great invention of the steam engine. So things all come at a price, right? And this was it. That's it for chapter 31. I'll see you next time for Story of the Road highlights. Bye-bye.